I want to get back to the sexual cultures thing, which I also want to talk about in the extended section. Because I think we disagree a little bit on the extent. Okay, so I think I would say yes, there is an advantage I'm not advocating full Saudi Arabia, but
But
I do also think that there needs to be there needs to be but for that, Mrs. Lincoln, I think there need to be guardrails of some kinds. I think there need to be norms. I think that actually, in order to have a really sort of well functioning sexual culture, I think there need to be sort of shared expectations which regulate behavior, because I think if it's a complete free for all and people just do completely whatever they want, you end up having lots of dysfunction and having lots of people getting hurt. And I wanted to talk about this in relation to, as you say, having a very young skewing ethnic minority population in Britain, often people coming from quite conservative cultures, being much more religious than white British people. And I was, while you were talking about that, I was thinking of Michaela Cole's series, I May Destroy You. Have you seen
yeah,
it? I think it's really, really good. And it was enormously well received when it came out a year or two ago on TV. And the thing that I felt really strongly watching it, and also knowing a little bit about Michaela Cole's background, because she used to be extremely religious and then is maybe less so now, but you can still see very clearly, I think, in the whole show, her kind of Christian assumptions about sexuality. And on the one hand, some people read it as being a sort of sex positive account of why consent is really important. Okay, so that's one way that you can read the show, because you have the characters sort of experiencing sexual abuse in various different ways, and it's a very sort of sensitive portrayal of how people can be harmed by sexual abuse and misbehavior. But then I also watched it and I thought, hang on, every single time someone is sort of chooses to be hedonistic sexually, they end up being punished in one way or another in the show. Like, that's a really consistent theme. And actually, the sex scenes are really not very sexy at all. I think they're deliberately filmed to not be very sexy. It's like filmed at a distance and all this kind of stuff. And I thought, I actually think what's going on here is Michaela Cole is actually herself very, very critical of the sexually liberal culture. And she's also a very clever writer and actress. And it's like embedded within the story is actually a very critical position on what is, really a very white progressive thing. Like, the sex positive culture is actually really at odds with, say, Michaela's family culture and what you'll not just West African communities, but also South Asian, and like completely different attitude. And I actually thought there's a really, really interesting tension there, which most reviewers of the show, I thought, missed. Do you see that tension playing out in how sort of sexual culture is emerging in Britain?
no, I think that's a really interesting perspective on the show, and I do think that for most ethnic minority people, they do feel that in their own kind of family life, in a whole host of things. I mean, sexual culture is one of them, but I mean, there's quite a famous or well known meme that I've seen on Instagram and TikTok of when ethnic minority people, when they're younger, they go to their white parents' house, and the white friend's house, sorry, and their friend is like arguing with their parents, and they're like completely mortified that they could speak like that to their parents
Yeah.
because that would just be completely alien.
There are very funny TikToks about this.
Yeah.
God, there's like a whole genre of this. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. And I think for most, obviously, again, I don't want to generalize. I mean, I think it's probably best for me to speak about Nigerian people, even though I think there's a lot of parallels in different ethnic minority people from the global south. But the message oftentimes is very simple. It's don't have sex till you're married. It's pretty much as simple as that. And there is, and it oftentimes is about bringing shame on the family. And I think I understand a lot of the critiques of cultures of shame, and I think that, of course, that they can be taken to the extreme. But I think there is something very important and meaningful when people aren't just thinking about how they personally feel about engaging in an act, but actually how their family and community will feel about that. Actually, I think it ties us to kind of relationships of obligation and meaning and duty beyond just our kind of individual self-interest. And so for most kind of Nigerian girls, it is as simple as kind of don't have sex until you're married. And on top of that, your parents are often wanting you to marry up. You know, they're very much thinking about the family that your prospective other comes from, and so there's lots of kind of different considerations within that. You know, in contrast to a culture which hasn't got any of those particular obligations and norms, if not the other direction, as you mentioned, where for a lot of young girls, you know, they'll be told that they're frigid or judged if they're not partaking in the kind of sexually promiscuous culture. And I think that can be very difficult to navigate for a lot of ethnic minority young women. But I think a lot of them, for example, which is quite a good kind of counterbalance, will find relationships with people in the church, you know, if they're Christian, and be able to opt out of that. But others, I think, will feel kind of torn between these two worlds. And so I don't disagree with you when you say that actually we should have certain norms and certain obligations, because I think, as you put in in your book, that freedom for the pike is death for the minnow.
Freedom for the pike is death for the minnow. But not my phrase, but a great phrase.
Yeah, I think, but I don't see that as kind of contradictory to still having a level of freedom of choice. So I don't see the kind of sex positive feminism as the kind of pinnacle of freedom, because I actually think there's something very unfree about a kind of pervasive culture which doesn't have any kind of boundaries. Because if you have no boundaries, then it's not really freedom. It's essentially just a very kind of shallow form of license. And to me, freedom and morality go hand in hand, because then you're kind of making a choice and weighing up the different moral values and moral ways of being within society, and then and making a choice to whether that's embrace that or go against that. So I is a difficult argument to make, but I don't think that the sex positive feminism is, even though it's said it's done in the name of progress, I think that you can think that is not a good thing and not an example of progress, while still actually being resistant to an absolute morality around sexual relations, if that makes sense. Is there a middle ground between those things?
Somewhere between Saudi Arabia and like Sin City, yeah. I don't know, maybe we have to try, don't we?
Oh, I would agree with all of with many of your critiques about the harm it's causing to a lot of people, the kind of pornified culture, the way that dating happening on dating apps where everybody's got their own ideas, and the people that genuinely want a committed relationship are don't know where to go, because you're in a particular marketplace where you could be engaging with someone that's only interested in hookups, but has learned how to kind of game this system. and abuse or exploit people. So I agree with all of those things. I guess the difficulty is, so for me, I think agency has to come into it, and also what would this counter or new morality that and new norms be rooted in? Is it just a purely kind of utilitarian argument about well, this is kind of harming people, so let's try something different? And I know that you're obviously very interested in evolutionary psychology, but to me, I think what was good about the past sexual morality is that it was rooted in a notion of the good that in itself was rooted in a kind of religious ethic. And I think in order for something to, I think it has to be rooted in something stronger for it to really gain cultural and moral authority within society. And I'm just not sure that we're at that point yet where it feels rooted, other than just a kind of general critique of the direction of travel.